Well, here I am, considering that it's, again, pretty late and I still have more work to get done and I have to be on call for another thing. I'm gonna do another talking video. It also doesn't hurt that the last one of these that I did was like the highest liked video of the last 6 months, so I guess people liked it or something. This one's not gonna be as long because it's more quick to the point of a concept, and this is a surprisingly unpopular opinion, even though I consider it a pretty cut and dry piece of logic. I don't believe in tipping your waiter. Now let me start tackling this by the most common rebuttals that I get. And I think they are the very thesis for why I don't believe in tipping. And number one is waiters rely on tips. Yes, absolutely. Because they're one of the few jobs where you can legally pay them under the minimum wage. Why? Because of tipping. Now, there's another caveat, which is they make a lot of untaxable income. That's phenomenal. I don't want them, but that's irrelevant to the argument. Because if everybody got the opportunity to make some untaxable income, that would be beautiful, but they're not exempt from every other job. They're waiters and they should make a living wage. That's essentially my argument. The other huge chunk of my argument comes from me as the consumer, my perspective. My least favorite thing is at the end of my meal, I now have to make a moral decision about how much to pay your employees. The fact that we allow tipping as a custom allows employers, restaurants, to pay their staff under minimum wage. I would happily pay more for my meal if it meant that I did not have to make a awful pressure decision at the end of my meal. I don't want to be responsible for how much of a quality of life your employees have. That's your job. That's the whole reason you have this establishment, is you're providing a service. I can make food at home. I'm perfectly capable of doing that. But I go to a restaurant because I want all the stress of doing dishes, making the food, preparing it, getting the groceries. I want all of that gone so I can just focus on the food or the company that I have. Instead, I'm put in this weird position where I have to make not only a calculated decision, but it's also sort of a comparative thing where we all judge each other on how much do you pay. Because it just keeps going up. If I'm not mistaken, it used to be 15% was the custom, and now with inflation, 20% is the custom. But of course, there's always this big conversation of kind of like, well, I do 25% because they work really hard. That's so fucked up. Tipping, in my opinion, should be when you pay someone above the expected rate for going above and beyond. Tipping should never be a set amount. That's not a tip. That's a wage. You're paying a wage. It's a tax. You're paying a tax on the employee. Again, this argument has nothing to do with, I absolutely believe that these employees, these waiters, deserve the money they make. Do they deserve it to be untaxable? Sure, I don't know, but that's irrelevant to the argument. They deserve a living wage and not being able to pay it under the minimum wage. They deserve to make what they work for. The other side of this, in my eyes, the most unfair side of this is the 20% rule. You're not paying them based on how hard they work. You're paying them based on the profit margin that the said company has chosen to set. I have been in diners and see waiters work way harder than people in a Bertucci's. But the difference is those waiters get paid more money, not because it has nothing to do with the reflection of work. It's simply because they work at an establishment with more expensive food. And as you know, that doesn't always mean better food. The expectation would be that the more expensive the food, the better the service, but that's not always the case, unfortunately. And you get workers who are working really, really hard, but they just simply are getting less tips because of that percentage problem. I know there are moral flaws to this argument, and I know there are moral nuances to being a waiter. I've never worked as a waiter. I've worked in sort of food industry, but never as a waiter. So there's a lot of nuances that I'm sure I'm overlooking. But in my brain, this argument has nothing to do with those things. This is simply an on-paper logical issue. And I think the easiest solve for that issue is to charge more for the meal. I will pay that additional 20%, just include it in the price of the meal, because that's a chore. That's a chore at the end of my meal to again have to make a moral decision as to what to pay your employees. You are responsible for your employees. I don't walk in there and it leaves this incredible open air of judgment. One thing I do know about working in restaurants is a lot of times the waiters are taking flack for the kitchen's problem. If the kitchen gets backed up, food comes out late. I've been at the table with people who will tip the waiter less because they had to wait a long time for their food. Tell me how that's fair. Tell me how that is a legitimate reason to pay someone less money. See, I'm getting all worked up. It just, to me, tipping is such a archaic, it doesn't even make sense anymore. Tipping should always be in addition to what their livable wage is. Now, you can argue what a livable wage is. That's, again, irrelevant. But the fact that we allow these individuals to get paid under the minimum wage simply because they're supposed to make it up in their tips is just, it's purely on face value is an unjust system, especially when there's virtually no other industry that works this way with some exception. The third and final kind of common argument that I'll get back to this concept is that that's the system that keeps waiters in check because they have to work for their tips. I'm gonna say it again. There is no other industry, with a few exceptions, that works like this, but yet the world still keeps turning. The industry keeps moving. Bad employees exist no matter what. And frankly, I've had bad waiters regardless of whether or not I tip them high or low. And the fact of the matter is, give me a survey at the end of the meal. Have the manager come up and ask me, or maybe, how about how the rest of capitalism works? I just never go back to that restaurant. So then again, let's put the burden back on the employer to have good employees. Don't make that about me and my tipping. It's sick. It's unfair. It's immoral. It's illogical, and it's a pain in the ass. Frankly, I hate sitting down at the end of my meal and again making a moral decision, because the sick part of it is sometimes, see, I'm getting all worked up, sitting up in my chair. The sick part of it is myself, and I've seen other people do this, I'll admit to it. Sometimes my meal will be really expensive and I'm like, ooh, this might be my opportunity to save a few bucks. Sometimes I'm tipping lower just because of my own finances. That's my problem. That's a shitty thing to do. I'll own up to that. I'm just saying, again, you're introducing all these variants and variables to the employee's wage that are so out of their control and so unfair. And the fact that people defend this system of payment blows my mind. Because frankly, to my perspective, if you believe in tipping, you are doing a disservice to that waiter. I think we all collectively need to stand up against this system and change the tide of the way that our restaurants operate. It seems like a small potato argument. It is. But there's a lot of waitstaff in this country. And I know they like that untaxable income. I would too. I don't get it. Most people don't. So, yeah, I don't like tipping. I don't support it. I do it, but I hate it. And I'm vocal about it. And come at me. If you got arguments against it, I'm wide open, because I feel like I've heard it all at this point from waiters. Oddly enough, waiters and waitresses seem to defend this the hardest, and I think it's because they get a lot of cash under the table from it. And again, that's dope, but that's not a reason to continue the system. Okay. That's all I got. I gotta take a phone call.